My family usually hosts Thanksgiving at our house. I live there with my wife, and typically our parents as well as siblings and some aunts and uncles will come. It's usually anywhere between 15 and 20 people there for Thanksgiving dinner. It's always a great time. So I remember that last year, family started coming over in the early afternoon. Very quickly, the house started to fill up with everyone. I was busy talking to people and helping my wife with the cooking. I remember that I walked back out from the kitchen to see the living room filled with people. But there was one random guy there who I did not know. I was very confused to see him. He was just standing amongst the people and kind of looking around. I went up to one of my uncles and asked him who the guy was. My uncle told me the guy was walking up the same time they arrived, and the guy told him that he was good friends with me. I said that I had no clue who he was. I decided that I had better ask him to leave, or find out why he was in my house. So I started to walk over to the guy, except right when I did, he made eye contact with me and then started walking away. The guy went over to the stairs and then walked up them, and nobody else was upstairs at all. That's where a few bedrooms were, and that was pretty much it. I had a really bad feeling about this guy now. I walked up the stairs after him, and when I got up there, I wasn't sure where he had gone. All the doors up there were closed as they had been before. I called out asking who was there, but got no response. Then I tried the first door, which was a guest bedroom. It opened up and I looked around in the room, but could not find anyone. Then I went into the hallway again and down to our bedroom. When I got there, the door was locked. I realized that this is where the guy was. I knocked on the door and asked him to come out, but I got no response. I went back downstairs and told my wife about it, as well as a few other people. We decided to call the police, not knowing if the man was dangerous or what. He stayed locked in the bedroom the entire time. Eventually, the police came and got him out of there. I have no idea why the guy entered our house. A few years back, my family was preparing to host Thanksgiving at our house for the 5th year in a row. We were expecting many guests, so we decided to buy a lot of food. I was a junior or senior in high school at the time, and I worked at an electronics store. It was the night before Thanksgiving, and my mother asked me to pick up some more food last minute on my way home from work. I stopped at Walmart, which was very busy. I went inside and got all of the things that my mother had asked for, which took me longer than I had expected because of all the people that were there. When I was done, I walked back to my car and put the groceries inside of it. When I did, I noticed there was a car parked next to me with several people in it in the parking lot. As soon as I got near my car, it started up. I didn't pay much attention to it, and I started my engine and drove away. The car left at the exact same time as me and remained behind me for quite some time. It was a typical looking car, maybe a little bit old, and was black. I only lived about 5 to 10 minutes away from the store and made it back pretty quickly. I was slightly concerned though when I turned onto my street and saw the car turn on as well. I figured it was a coincidence and I pulled into my driveway, but when I did, I noticed the car stopped on the street in front of my house. I went inside and unpacked the groceries and then went back to the window to see if the car was still there. Sure enough, it was, and that's when I told my parents and older brother about it. They said they wanted to go outside and confront whoever it was, so they walked outside, but as soon as they made it out the front door, the car drove away. Relieved, I went back and helped my mother prepare some of the food for the next day. Later on that night though, as I was about to go to sleep, I heard 2 very loud bangs at the front door. It was very startling. Several of us walked over to the window, but by the time we got there, we didn't see anything at all. We stayed on alert for a few minutes, but eventually we all decided to try to go to bed. I was able to finally fall asleep, but was awakened not much longer at 2 a.m. to hear the sound of a banging noise coming from outside. I got out of bed and walked out to the living room. I saw my parents standing in the hallway and heard my mom say she was calling the police. I went to the window and saw 2 people banging on the window of our car in the driveway. Before long, one of the windows broke. They kept banging on the windows as the glass kept shattering, and then they went inside the car. My dad ran to the front door and opened it a crack and shouted that he had called the police. They didn't seem fazed though and remained inside the car. When I looked to the street, sure enough, the same black car that had been following me was parked across from us again. A couple of minutes later, the police arrived. They quickly ran to the car in our driveway and arrested the two people. We were all very relieved when that happened. I have no clue why those people chose to target us and break into our car, other than that they were completely insane. We ended up staying up until 3 that morning, but nevertheless, it ended up being a really good Thanksgiving the next day. This is the scariest and craziest thing to ever happen to me, and it happened on Thanksgiving. It was when I was about 18 or 19 years old, and my family was hosting Thanksgiving at our house. I would say in total there was about 15 people there, mostly my cousins, aunts, and uncles. We had lots of food, and it seemed to be another great Thanksgiving. By about 9 p.m., a few people had left and gone home, and I was sitting on the couch watching football. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the power in our house went completely out, and everything was pitch black. It was strange because it wasn't storming or anything. Then we started hearing these loud bangs at the front door. It was pretty frightening, and I slowly got up and left the room to look out the window to the front door. There were several men standing there right at the front door, wearing all black with ski masks. As soon as I saw this, I immediately jumped back. Then they started banging on the door once again. My dad went towards the door, and when he saw the men, he ran to go get his gun. The banging got louder, and then one of the men ran over to the window and started banging on it. The rest of the people at our house all started going upstairs, and I know I heard someone say they were calling the police. My dad came back down and showed his gun in the window and yelled out he was about to shoot them all. I thought he was crazy for doing that, but it ended up working. The men all ran away, and within another 5 minutes the cops had arrived. They stayed for a while, and eventually my dad was able to get our generator working, which restored our power for the night. It turns out they had cut one of our power lines. It made for a crazy Thanksgiving night. Back when I was younger, we used to go to my aunt and uncle's house for Thanksgiving every year. When I was about 14 or so, I remember that on Thanksgiving my family and I went there as usual. We would get there sometime in the early afternoon, and a bunch of other family members would be there as well. Their house was about 20 minutes from our house and a little bit out in the country. They had a really large property, and the neighborhood was very quiet, with the houses being more spread out. At their house, they also had this dog that I really liked. I didn't have any pets of my own at the time, so I remember that a few hours after getting there, people were hanging out and talking all around the house. I saw that the dog was near the front door, indicating that he wanted to go outside. I went over to my uncle and offered to take the dog out, and he agreed. My uncle told me that the dog had an electric fence along the edge of the property because he had a tendency to want to run around a lot. Sometimes he would chase squirrels or whatever and run out of the yard. So because of this, I took the leash and then left the house with the dog. We walked sort of down the long driveway they had and into the front yard a little bit. From there, you couldn't even see the next door neighbor's house because it was farther away, plus there was a small woods in between. The dog did its business and then was sniffing around on the ground when I saw a man walking down the street. It was strange to see somebody walking because the neighborhood was always so quiet and there were no sidewalks. It was a shorter, stocky man with a goatee wearing a blue jacket. He saw me and started to walk up the long driveway. I walked over to him with the dog still, and the man said hi. He then asked me if I was visiting for Thanksgiving, and I said yes. The man said that he lived right next door and pointed to the property to the right, except the only thing I could see were the trees when he pointed over there. He then said that he had recently borrowed a wheelbarrow and some tools from my uncle, and asked me if I could do him a favor and go get them. I asked him where they were, and he said they were in his garage. I said yes at first, but then realized that would require 2 hands to get a wheelbarrow, and I was still walking the dog. I told the man that I was just going to take the dog back inside quick, and then I could do it. But the man said no. He offered to take the dog from me while we went over. I realized that wouldn't work though because of the electric fence, and I didn't want to just let the dog run around the yard. So I said I would just be right back, and then I walked away up the driveway. Then I went back inside with the dog and saw my uncle standing talking to someone not that far away. I figured that I would tell him about the neighbor before I went back out. When I told my uncle though, he looked confused and asked me which neighbor. I pointed to the direction, and my uncle said that those neighbors were out of town for Thanksgiving. He also told me that he hadn't lent a wheelbarrow or tools to anyone. He then asked me to describe the man, and my uncle said that he didn't know of anyone who lived nearby matching that description when I did, and it certainly was not the homeowner of the house next door. My uncle was now very curious and decided to go outside and see the man. I went back outside with him, but when we got out there, the man was gone. We walked to the end of the driveway and out into the street. The street was completely quiet and empty though. We then walked down the street to the direction of the house which the guy had pointed to. My uncle said that a husband and wife lived there, and they told him that they were leaving for a week. When we arrived at their driveway, we actually walked up it. This driveway was also very long, but we noticed that the garage door was wide open. My uncle walked up to it and called out, asking if anybody was there. However, there was no response, but he came back soon, saying that some of the things appeared to be messed up. I guess my uncle knew most of the neighbors pretty well, and he knew that the guy who actually did live there kept things pretty neat. We walked back over to my uncle's house, and then he called the police. When they came out, they found that the garage door had been pried open, and some things were messed up, but nobody was located. We didn't see that guy for the rest of the night. Looking back, I'm really glad that I didn't go with the guy. I have no idea what could have happened. I'm glad that I told my uncle when I did, and I hope that man was eventually located. Many years ago, when I was a kid, I was going with my parents to my uncle's house for Thanksgiving. He lived in the city in a big neighborhood with lots of houses. I was probably about 7 or 8 at the time, and it was nice, but there wasn't really anyone else my age there, so I would get bored at family things. We got there and talked to everyone in the family that was there. I remember at one point I was looking out the front window, and I saw a man walking down the street slowly and kind of looking at each house as he passed by. Then about 30 minutes later, I saw him walk by again, this time in the other direction. Over the next hour or so, I saw him walk by several other times. He seemed to be just walking back and forth down the street, wandering around. Eventually, somebody else there noticed and made a comment about it. Then he walked away once again, and I didn't see him for a while. Soon after that, it was time to eat, and afterwards, I went out to the yard to play football. It was just me playing football with myself because there were no other kids there, but I still liked to throw it around because my uncle had one of those mini trampolines. I would put it up against the fence as a target to throw at. I was practicing my throws when one of the balls bounced away to the side. When I went to get it, I saw it was next to a thick bush, and hiding in the bush was the bald man. I freaked out and ran all the way back inside screaming. I ran to my parents and told them what had happened. They went outside, but the man was gone by then. My uncle looked around his yard, then walked up and down the street for a bit, but we figured the man had to be scared off. A few hours went by, and most people went home. It was just me and my parents and my aunt and uncle chatting in the kitchen. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock at one of the back windows of my uncle's house. We looked just in time to see the man ducking down below the window. He then ran away. My uncle had had enough and he called the police. They showed up about 10 minutes later and were able to catch the man. He turned out to be on some sort of drugs and was walking around the neighborhood being creepy. This story happened when I was in college. I was a graduate student living on campus about an hour away from my parents' house. When the week of Thanksgiving came, I went home after classes on Monday. We had the whole rest of the week off, so I would be staying at my parents' house for a little while. When I got back home, the second day, during the night, I was sleeping in my bedroom when I was awoken. Now, my bedroom is on the first floor, and it's on the front side of the house. It was the middle of the night, and I thought that I heard the sound of a knocking on my window. It was really creepy. I sat up in bed and looked over to the window. There was a curtain covering it, so I couldn't really see anything. I did not hear the knocking again, so I got up, walked over to the window, and looked out of it. When I looked around the yard, everything seemed fine and I didn't notice anything. I still didn't know what made the sound though. I went back to my bed and sat down, still looking in the direction of the window. That's when I saw something move past the window only for a brief second. I couldn't see any details because I really just saw the shadow from the other side of the curtains, but somebody had definitely walked past outside. I got up again, ran over to the window and looked out. Whoever it was gone again. I glanced all around the yard of what I could see, but I never saw anything at all. I went back to my bed again and sat back down and didn't see anything for the next few minutes. I didn't know exactly what was going on. After it seemed like things were back to normal, I tried to go back to sleep again. I laid down and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, when I was starting to fall asleep, I heard knocking again on the window. There was no mistaking it. I sat up and saw that somebody was right outside. I couldn't tell who they were because my curtains were still closed. I could just see like a silhouette of their figure. It looked to be a man. Then I heard what sounded like a faint laughter coming from the other side of the window. It was really creepy. I turned on all of the lights to my bedroom and then saw the guy finally moving away. He left my sight, and when I got to the window, he was gone again. Somebody was definitely messing with me, but I didn't know who or why. I stayed up for quite a while before finally was able to go back to sleep. The next day, I told my parents about it. We were unsure of what could be done. There were no signs of an attempted break-in. I couldn't even give a description of the man. We just hoped that it wouldn't happen again. The next day went by as normal, but that night I stayed up late watching TV in the living room with my parents. It was a little bit after midnight when we all heard a noise coming from the other room. We all got up at once and went over to a window. From there, though, we couldn't see anything. We heard the noise again. Now it was more clear that somebody was hitting my bedroom window. We called the police and then moved as far to the other side of the house as we could. We heard another noise. After that, things were quiet for a while. The police arrived really fast, though. When they got there, they found a man hiding in our backyard. None of us knew who he was. The guy had been trying to break into our house through my bedroom window. The window hadn't even broke though, but there were some marks on it. I'm really glad that he didn't get in. I'm also really glad that I was not in my bedroom at the time, but with my parents in the living room. It had to be the same guy who had been there the night before. Since this happened, every year when I go back to my parents for Thanksgiving, we joke around about it. At the time, it wasn't so funny though, and I'm really glad that everyone is okay. This happened just last year. It was Thanksgiving. The family gathering was at my aunt and uncle's. My wife and I live across town, about 20 minutes away from their house. It's a pretty nice place, and we were there hanging out with family and had a turkey dinner. We were planning to go Black Friday shopping early the next morning, so at about 9 p.m. we left to go home. We said our goodbyes and then walked out of the house into the driveway. They had a pretty big driveway. It was big enough for everybody's car to fit in it. When we backed out though, we noticed that there was a car parked on the side of the road right in front. Now this was a little bit strange because it was a dirt road and not all that wide. I remember I even made a comment to my wife about it as we backed out. Right when we had gotten into the street, we noticed the lights to the car turn on and the engine start up. It was a smaller looking car that seemed to be dark in color. When we drove off down the street, the car drove behind us. Like I said, it took about 20 minutes to get back home, and there were a number of turns and different roads to go on. The entire drive, the car stayed behind us. We were wondering who this could be. Was it somebody we knew? I didn't think so. I didn't recognize the car, plus, why would they follow us home without letting us know? But who would do this? We got all the way back home, and I pulled into our driveway. The car did the same, but stopped at the far end. Now I was kind of concerned by this. I got out of the car and looked down to the car at the end of the driveway. I could see inside of it for the first time, and there appeared to be a man in the driver's seat. When I was standing in the driveway facing him, the guy shut off his car and got out as well. I saw he was sort of skinny, wearing a red shirt, black pants, and a hat. He immediately started yelling at me and seemed really angry, but I really couldn't tell exactly what he was saying. It seemed like he was just kind of yelling stuff. I asked the guy what he wanted, but he really didn't answer. He just kept yelling. He was standing by his car for the most part, but took a couple of steps closer to me. I warned the guy that I was going to call the police. At first, he didn't seem to care, but but within a few seconds he stopped and then got back inside of his car and started the engine. My wife and I walked inside after that as we saw him driving away. We both got inside, but no more than 5 minutes later, there was a banging at the front door. It was loud and aggressive. I looked out the front window and saw that the same guy was now back. I surely was not going to open the door to him. He kept banging on the door and then tried opening it. I didn't hesitate and called 911. The man was persistent and kept banging on the door and trying to open it, and eventually he moved to the back of the house and started banging on random windows. He also tried getting in the back door, which also was locked, thankfully. I was getting concerned that he would be able to break in until finally the police arrived. They were able to find the man pretty quickly. I never knew where the guy came from though, why he followed us home, or what he wanted. Every Thanksgiving, my family and extended family would get together, basically using the holiday as a family reunion as well. We would always do it at my aunt's house because she had the biggest place and property. It was best suited to fit everyone who came each year, although it would still be crowded. After dinner, the kids would usually be in a separate area of the house, like upstairs or in the basement. I spent a little time with the kids, but not many of my cousins were close to my age, so I spent more time with the adults. I liked spending time with the adults because they were funny and would also have funny stories to share. As I was hanging out with the adults, I noticed something a little strange. My Uncle Bobby had stepped inside after a smoke, and his grin was a little strained. I noticed it right away. He and my dad had served together in the military, and they both had that look, the kind that said that something was gnawing at them. My curiosity got the best of me, and I pulled Bobby's arm, pestering him until he finally took me aside. He pointed across the street to an old house. It was one that I'd heard about all my life, and every time we'd come over to my aunt's house, I was warned to stay away from it. My dad, Uncle Bobby, and the other two adults had explored it when they were younger, and the same group wanted to go check it out again. When I found out they were going, I somehow convinced them to bring me along. I guess I had pestered them enough about it. The house loomed like a ghost from the past. It was a faded 50s two-story structure with peeling paint. As we entered, I immediately noticed there were tons of drawings on the walls, but they didn't really seem like graffiti. It was more like intentional drawings. Bobby led the way into the kitchen. In the center of the room was a pentagram, flanked by carcasses. They were fresh, only looking a day or two old, and the smell was overwhelming. I realized I might have bitten off a little more than I could chew, and I already wanted to leave. The other adults insisted on checking out the basement though, so I went with them. We turned and headed for a narrow staircase tucked behind a wall. The basement was dim, a stark contrast to the chaos above. Cans of food were scattered around, and makeshift mats were on the ground. A single propane heater was in the middle of the room. In the corner, there was a pile of bones. They looked like chicken bones, at least I hoped they were, but I wasn't sure. It was clear with the carcasses upstairs and stuff in the basement that somebody was living there or had recently been living there. The adults finally all agreed that it was time to go. We had only been there for maybe 5 minutes or less, but I was very scared. As we were leaving out the front door, I was sure that I heard light footsteps upstairs on the second floor. We made it back across the street to my aunt's house safely, and the rest of the night was uneventful. Years later, I learned the truth about that house. There had been a cult based around the area. They used to break into farms and steal small livestock to use for their rituals. But apparently one of the women in the cult had recently run off the rails and started to abduct people in and around the area. I forget the woman's name, but people in that area started calling her the Wicked Witch of the East. The authorities ended up catching 2 of her accomplices, but as far as I know, she herself was never caught. The crazy witch woman might have never been in that house that my family and I had explored. It could have been a house that the more normal cult members who didn't kill people used and stayed in occasionally. Either way, it was a freaky Thanksgiving night, and for all I know, maybe we did stumble across the Wicked Witch of the East that night. This story happened to me many years ago when I was about 12. My family went to Thanksgiving at my grandmother's house every single year. There was quite a few of us that would be there, and we would always watch football and have a big turkey. I remember this year, it was about 3 p.m. and it got kind of crowded inside my grandmother's house. My younger brother and I decided to go outside and walk around. My grandmother had a pretty big property that had some woods on it on either side of the house. She definitely lived more out in the country, so the houses were a lot farther apart. My younger brother and I just kind of walked around the yard. It had snowed a little bit, so the ground was a mix of white snow and the green grass. We ended up wandering off through the side woods a little bit, but then we noticed someone. There was a man standing there about 50 feet away. He looked to be fairly young, but was definitely an adult. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, which I found strange because it was pretty cold outside. When he noticed us, he waved. Then he called out hi to us in a friendly voice and began to walk over. When we got over to him, he introduced himself and said his name was Oscar. He told us he lived next door, and then pointed over. We could see a house through the trees that he was pointing at. He asked us what we were doing out here, and we told him that we were there for Thanksgiving. The three of us chatted for a couple of minutes about basic stuff, until finally I said we should get back. The man then told us he needed some help getting his new washing machine from his garage into his house, and asked us if we would help. I really didn't feel comfortable doing it, and I also didn't want to, so I told him I'm sorry but no thanks. Then me and my brother started to walk away. The man said he understood, and then started to walk back up to his house. We went through the woods, which took us about 5 minutes to get back. When we had just about made it back, I was sure I heard someone walking behind us at a pretty far distance. I turned around, but I didn't see anything. My brother and I made it back inside just in time for dinner. As we sat down, our grandmother asked us how it was out in the yard. We told her how we had talked to the next door neighbor. She looked surprised when we said this, and asked us which neighbor. We pointed in the direction and said the house next door. She told us that the house over there was vacant and nobody had lived there in about a year. When she said that, it gave me the chills. I was so glad I said no to helping the man. About 5 years ago, we were hosting Thanksgiving at our house. It was my wife, our 2 kids, and me who lived there. Our kids were pretty little at the time, and we were expecting about 20 or more people for Thanksgiving dinner, pretty much all of them being family members. Our house is in a neighborhood with a little bit more land. I would say most properties have roughly 5 acres or so, and it's a nice and quiet place to live. On Thanksgiving, our guests started arriving at about 1 p.m. or so. We were going to have dinner at like 4 or 5, so we had some snacks out and things like that. More and more people were arriving, and pretty soon, almost everybody, if not everybody, was there. I was helping out and getting food ready, also talking to family and watching football. At one point, there was a knock on our front door, and I went to go answer it to let whoever was there in. But when I got to the door, no one was there. I stepped outside and looked around. Our driveway was full of cars, and there were even some cars parked out in the street in front of the house, but I didn't see anybody. I hadn't taken all that long to get to the door either. I asked if anybody was there, but still got nothing, so I just went back inside after that. Before long, all of the people that we were expecting were there, but once again, after this, I heard another knock on the door again. When I went to answer it, there was nobody there. Now I was a little bit confused, but with everything going on, I quickly forgot about it. About an hour later, some of the kids that were there, as well as a few adults, wanted to go out and play some football. It was pretty good weather, a little chilly, but not too cold at all. I went to the closet right in front of our front door to get my coat, and when I opened up the door, I saw a woman, but not anybody that I knew. It was like she was hiding in there, and she had on a winter hat and looked at me with an angry face. I was sort of in shock, and just stood there for a moment, unable to speak. The woman then emerged from the closet and ran past me, headed upstairs, which was only a couple of feet away. She ran out of there so fast. Nobody else really saw this, and I went around asking if anybody knew who she was. Pretty soon, everybody at the gathering was talking about who this woman could be. Thankfully, nobody was upstairs when she ran up. Not anybody there knew her, and I took a couple of steps up the stairs and yelled, asking who she was and why she was in our house. She didn't answer, though. I told her that she needed to come down and leave out the front door or I was going to call the police. Still nothing, so that's exactly what I did. I stayed by the stairs in case the woman was going to come back down and made sure that nobody else went up or anything like that. For the most part, everybody stayed away from that part of the house and in the living room, dining room, and kitchen. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. When they did, I told them what had happened and they went upstairs. They were up there for a while, and when they came back down, they said that the woman was no longer there and they thought she had jumped out of a window. I went upstairs and saw that a window in one of the bedrooms was wide open. The police guessed that she jumped out. The distance to the ground in that area was really not all that high, and it was a doable jump. The police went outside and searched the property a bit. We had a large yard with a bit of a woods, but unfortunately, they never found her. They left, and we went back to our Thanksgiving get-together. Thankfully, we never did see the woman again. I've always wondered, though, who she was and what she was doing. A few years ago, my wife and I were going to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. It is a tradition to go there, and my parents have a decent-sized house only about 10 or 15 minutes away from ours. Most of the way to get there is through mostly quiet and windy roads. I remember that we left in the late morning, and it was a very nice and sunny day. As we drove through the quiet roads, we were looking forward to seeing all the people that would be there. Aside from my parents, there would be lots of other extended family. However, when we had made it to within just a few minutes of my parents' place and were just outside of their neighborhood, something strange happened. We were driving past this dense wooded area to the right of the road. As we did, we saw up ahead this man seemingly come out of the woods and then walk out onto the road. He then stopped and was facing us, just standing there. The man appeared to be younger and was wearing a sweatshirt and jeans and had slightly longer hair. He also had a patchy-looking beard. It was a strange thing to see, and I had to slow down significantly after noticing him. My wife and I were wondering what he was doing. I came to a near stop, and that's when the man waved at me and then started walking over towards my driver's window. I remember that before I even rolled the window down or stopped completely, my wife saying not to let him in whatever he says because he looks sketchy. So the man was clearly trying to get my attention, and I stopped and I rolled down the window, wondering what he wanted. He said hi to us at first, and then asked us if we could give him a ride. He claimed that he just wanted to get to the gas station. There was one that was a little ways back down the road in the opposite direction. We weren't going that way though, and the guy did seem sketchy. I told him no, I couldn't do that. The man pleaded with me, saying that it was not very far, but I still said no. I did, however, ask if he had a phone, or if he wanted me to call somebody for him, but he declined. So at that point, with the man still standing there next to my driver's window, I started to drive away. I wondered what exactly he was doing. So we continued with the rest of the drive to my parents' house, which didn't take that much longer at all. After arriving, we went inside and started talking and hanging out with everyone. I remember asking a few people that got there after us if the man had stopped them in the road too, or if they had seen him. Nobody else said that they saw him though. As Thanksgiving went on, at one point, I was standing near the front side of the living room in my parents' house. I happened to notice out the window that a man was walking down the street, and it looked a lot like the same guy that we had seen earlier. He was walking very slowly, just kind of looking around like he was lost. But eventually, he made his way down the street and out of my sight, and I soon forgot about him. But later on, in the evening when it was now dark out, I remember hearing a knock at the door. People were wondering who it was, because everybody was already there who had been invited. Someone else walked over to the door and looked, but did not open it. I remember hearing that some random guy was standing there. My parents got called over, asking if they knew him, and I walked over as well, remembering the man I had seen earlier. When we all got to the window, it was sure enough the same man. I told him not to answer the door, saying that it was the sketchy guy who had asked me for a ride earlier. The man stood there at the doorstep for a few moments before turning to walk away, but he did not walk back towards the street. Instead, it looked as though he was starting to make his way to the back of the house. At that point, one of my uncles opened up the front door slightly and yelled at the guy, asking what he was doing. The man then stopped, turned around, and ran away back out into the street and quickly out of our sight, and for the rest of the night, we didn't see him at all. I really don't know who the guy was or what he was up to, but it was very sketchy indeed. This story happened back when I was 19, my brother was 16, and my sister was 14. That year, like most other years, we went to my uncle's house for Thanksgiving. It was a tradition, and we would be there for most of the day. We'd leave our house sometime in the early afternoon, and then at my uncle's we would have turkey and watch football. A decent number of other people from my family would be there as well. There was lots of food, but we would eat really early at like 4 p.m. So I remember that night, after we left my uncle's house at about 9 p.m., My brother and I asked our parents to stop at McDonald's and get some food. Luckily, McDonald's was open because I don't think many other places were. My brother and I were starving, being active, growing young men and having not eaten for over 3 hours. My dad pulled into the parking lot and parked. It was near a shopping area which was pretty busy now. Some stores were nearby, and a few of them had already opened for Black Friday shopping. My brother and I walked inside, and my parents and sister stayed in the car, saying that they didn't want anything. We saw that there was a decent amount of other people inside of the McDonald's. It wasn't packed, but busier than we expected. Soon we ordered the food and then stood around waiting. We were standing out of the way, kind of on the side, and out of nowhere, this guy came up to us. He had a gross beard that was messy, and the man overall looked somewhat disheveled. He stood right by me and didn't say anything to me at all. It was really weird, so I moved away a few steps. The man then moved closer. My brother and I then moved to the whole other side of the restaurant. At first, the man did not follow, but after like 10 seconds, he came over to us and just stopped there. Finally, we heard our number being called, and we walked up and got the food. Then we headed to the exit. The man walked faster than us and stood in front of the doors, blocking them. We didn't know what this guy's problem was. We stopped and asked him to move. He didn't and ignored us. My brother asked him what his problem was, and the man still said nothing. I moved past him, slightly bumping the guy, but I was able to get around him. As I did, I told him to leave us alone. The guy then started walking behind us as we left the restaurant. My dad had parked our car in sort of the back corner of the parking lot. It was the only car in that particular area. When the guy saw us headed there, he took off and started sprinting past us. We were hoping that he would run away out of the parking lot, but instead, the guy stopped right in front of our car. My brother and I realized that we couldn't go there anymore. We saw the man start to knock on my dad's window. My brother and I were standing just a few feet in the parking lot. I called my dad on the phone and told him to drive to the Walmart parking lot and meet us there by the entrance doors. I told him that the guy seemed to be crazy. Then, my brother and I took off running and went out of the parking lot towards Walmart. It was a short distance away and would only take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to run there. My brother and I were pretty fast and made it there all right. The guy didn't chase us either. My dad drove away from the weird guy, and I'm not sure where he ended up going, but my parents and sister soon arrived at the Walmart. We got inside the car, and the man was nowhere in sight. After that, we were able to drive home safely. I'm not sure what that guy's problem was. I would guess he was on drugs or something, but he just wouldn't leave us alone. I'm glad that we were able to get away from him. We always have Thanksgiving at my parents' house. It's normally just our immediate family, a pretty small gathering. 2 years ago, my sister Erin said that she was bringing her new boyfriend, Dylan. She'd only been dating him for about 2 months, but she said he was great, just a little shy. We all said sure, bring him. Mom cooked the usual turkey, mashed potatoes, and green bean casserole. Dad set up the folding table in the living room so we'd all fit. They showed up at about 4 p.m. Dylan was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a clean shirt and jeans. He looked normal enough. He shook everybody's hand. His grip was strong, but his smile felt forced. You could tell he was shy. We all sat down around 5. The first hour was fine. We talked about work, the weather, and small talk stuff, trying to incorporate Dylan. He didn't say much, just nodded and ate. He kept his eyes on his plate most of the time. When Dad asked him what he did for work, Dylan hesitated. He said something about construction, then added, for now, like he didn't want to talk about it. At one point, my mom offered him more turkey, and he said quietly, "No, that's enough." But the way he said it made the table go silent for a second, as it was a very commanding tone. It was after dessert that things started to feel strange. We were in the living room watching football. Dylan was sitting on the couch holding a glass of cider. Erin was next to him, leaning in close, talking softly. I couldn't hear what they were talking about, but I later found out from my sister that she was asking when she could meet his friends. Then he said loud enough for us to hear, "I told you, I don't like people prying into things." The room went quiet again. Erin looked confused. "I'm not prying," she said. "I'm just asking." That's when he stood up fast. The cider spilled onto the carpet. My dad said, "Hey, take it easy." And I started to stand, but Dylan's face changed. His eyes looked cold, like he wasn't seeing us anymore. He started yelling and screaming, not really saying any words I could understand. He grabbed the coffee table and shoved it over. Erin screamed. Dad tried to step between them, but Dylan pushed him so hard he hit the wall. I don't even remember deciding to move. I grabbed my phone and ran towards the kitchen, calling 911. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line. Our whole family now was in the kitchen with me as I made the 911 call. Dylan was still out in the living room. Then there was a loud crash. He'd broken one of the dining chairs. He was going on a rampage, destroying stuff in our living room, breaking or knocking over anything he could reach. When the police came, he didn't fight. He just stood there shaking, and they took him out in handcuffs. Erin was crying so hard she couldn't talk. Later we found out he'd been in some kind of psychiatric program. He'd stopped taking his medication a few weeks before, but Erin didn't know. Thanksgiving has been a really weird holiday for our family now since that one 2 years ago. When I was a kid, we used to have the whole family over for Thanksgiving. One year, we were cleaning the house the night before Thanksgiving, and my parents were cooking some of the pies. It was a great smell throughout the house, but I was busy taking things from upstairs and putting them down in the basement so there would be more room for everyone up there. Our basement wasn't finished, but we had a lot of things down there, and even an area with a rug and a TV where we would play video games sometimes. My mom asked me to bring up a couple extra chairs that we also kept down there. I went to the back corner behind the stairs where they were. It was the creepiest part of the basement in my opinion because it was just way back and in the corner. As I reached a chair, I thought I heard a noise behind me. Then, about 6 feet to my right, next to a large box, I saw a person slowly crawl from behind the box to behind the refrigerator that was next to the stairs. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like a man with long hair and baggy clothes. My first instinct was to run, but I knew that I would have to run past the man if I wanted to go back upstairs. So I did what the next best thing in my mind was, and that was to hide behind the chairs. I wanted to get back upstairs, but as far as I knew, the man was still behind the fridge. I waited there for what felt like an eternity. In reality, it was probably about 10 minutes. At last, I heard the door to upstairs open, and at first I was scared until I heard my mother call out asking to me what was taking so long. This made me feel a little more confident, so I walked out, and as I was talking to her, I said I would bring it right up. I grabbed the chairs and made my way upstairs. But to my surprise, when I got to the fridge, the man was gone. He must have somehow went somewhere else. I went back up the stairs, and as soon as I was completely up, I slammed the door shut and told my mom there was a man down there. When my dad heard this, he went downstairs to look around. He came back up about 5 minutes later saying there was nobody down there at all. I even went back down with him, and we couldn't find anyone. I felt crazy and as if I was imagining things. I thought maybe somehow the man had left, but I knew he wasn't down there anymore. I went to bed that night, still unsure of what had really happened. When I woke up on Thanksgiving morning, I went downstairs. I noticed I was the first one awake, so then I went to the basement door. When I did, I saw the door was wide open. The front door to our house was also unlocked. When my parents got up, we all went downstairs to look around and saw nothing. Whoever was down there must have left in the night, and I no longer felt crazy. I did, though, feel a lot more creeped out. But how they avoided us the first time we went down there, I will never know. This is something that happened back when I was a senior in high school. During that time, I worked a job at a local department store. I lived with my parents and brother in a decently populated neighborhood. I remember that we had off of school the day before Thanksgiving on Wednesday. Because of this, I worked earlier in the day so that I could get some extra hours and money. I got to work in the morning and got off of work at probably like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Afterwards, my mom had asked me to stop and get a few things on the way back. I went to a local grocery store that was about 10 minutes away from our house. There were a few other stores and things nearby, so it was hard to even find a parking space. A lot of other people were there doing grocery shopping, and this was a busy time. When I got inside of the store, people were all over the place. I tried my best to find the things that my mom had asked me to get. It took a little while, but I was able to, and then I got into the back of one of the lines. I think there were about 4 or 5 check lanes that were open, and there were a bunch of people in each line. I had never really seen it this busy before. Finally, after waiting in line for a while, it was my turn. I checked out and then headed home. I got maybe 4 or 5 items, and it had taken me about 30 minutes. That's how busy it was. When I got back to my car in the parking lot, I left and started driving back to my parents' house. The drive back would just be taking one road for a few minutes, and then turning once to a quieter road, before ours. The roads were pretty busy on the way back. When I finally turned onto our street, I remember a car turning right behind me. Our street was generally pretty quiet, but other cars driving down was not out of the ordinary. When I got to my house, though, I pulled into the driveway, and the car that was behind me pulled in too. This made me feel nervous, and I wondered what was going on. I just remembered the car being a dark-colored sedan and very average-looking. But then the car started backing up and turned around. They must have just been using our driveway to turn around and then go back the other way. But it was still kind of weird. Why not turn in any of the other neighbors' driveways? Why follow me into mine? Either way, they were gone now, and I felt much better as I saw the car start to go out of sight. I got out with the groceries and went inside the house. I gave them to my mom, who was already starting to cook. We were going to some other family members for Thanksgiving the next day, and everybody was bringing a few things over. I don't remember exactly what my mom was making, but I think it was some kind of pie. After getting home, I went into my room and finished my homework, and then for the rest of the night hung out with my family. We all went to bed and could sleep in a little bit the next day because it was Thanksgiving and none of us had work or school. However, for some reason, I woke up much earlier than I had planned. I remember opening my eyes and looking at my phone to see that it was 6-something in the morning. The sun was just starting to rise. I was really thirsty and sat up to get a drink of water. As I was doing so, there was a window right next to me, and I opened up the blinds a little bit to look out. When I did, I saw a car parked on the side of the road, kind of in front of our house. This was really weird. We rarely, if ever, had anybody parking out there. And if they were going to a neighbor's house, there was plenty of space to park in front of the other houses. This was the only car that I noticed parked on the side of the entire street also. It just looked really suspicious. The car was a black sedan, and it was the same as I had seen the day before, but in my head, I hadn't remembered that yet. The closer I looked, I saw that there was nobody inside of it. Now I was really interested in what was going on here. Instead of closing my blinds and going right back to bed, I stayed up a bit and kept watching. About a minute went by of nothing. Then, all of a sudden, I saw a man come walking from what appeared to be the side of our house. He was wearing a winter hat and a dark-colored jacket. I couldn't tell what he looked like, and I had no clue what he was doing. He walked through part of our front yard and then back to his car. He didn't get inside of the driver's seat, though. Instead, he went to the back door of his car. He opened it up, and it looked like he was getting something from inside, but I couldn't tell what. He was there for like a minute. Then he closed the door and turned around. He was holding like a really small duffel bag. At least that's what it appeared to be. It was kind of hard to tell though, because it was still a little bit dark out and he was far away. He took a few steps and then appeared to look right in my direction. When he did, he stopped. I realized that he could see me. There was a small lamp in my room, and it was dim, but it still provided light, and if my blinds were open like they were, you could see inside. I quickly closed them and then ducked down. I didn't know what was going to happen. Just seconds later, though, I heard the sound of a car door closing. I carefully lifted the blinds just a little bit and looked out the window. I saw the car quickly driving away. Whoever that guy was had left. Now I was wide awake and couldn't go back to bed. I got up, and when my parents got up as well, I told them all about it. We went outside and looked all around, but there was no signs of a break-in or anything. And after that day, we never saw the man or his car. I really don't know what was going on there. Maybe whatever he had planned on doing, after he realized I saw him, he decided not to. I really don't know though. I'm just glad that he didn't come back. I was about 15 at the time when this happened, and we always had huge Thanksgiving parties. There would usually be around 30 people cramming into our house. It wasn't your typical Thanksgiving. After dinner there was drinking, smoking, loud music, and lots of noise. This Thanksgiving I sat in the kitchen with some friends. There was a door that led to our enclosed back porch that also held the staircase to the basement. We would keep tables on the porch that held food because our kitchen was small and everyone brought a dish. As I said, I was sitting at the kitchen table with friends when I saw a man wearing blue jeans and a red silk top come up the basement stairs. At first, I thought he was a friend of one of my uncles. "Hey, what are you doing in the basement?" I asked. The man said nothing. He came walking towards me, and just then my grandma yelled aggressively, "Who are you?" Before the man could answer, my dad and 3 uncles had spotted this man. My uncles are generally aggressive and protective people, so when they heard my grandma yelling at this man to get out of our house, they instantly rushed towards him. They started beating him, yelling at him as he finally turned and ran for his life. They definitely landed a few shots before he took off. His nose was bleeding and his lip was bleeding as well. He managed to get outside into the yard and start running, but we had a German Shepherd, and she was out there and attacked the man. He was screaming, trying to get over the fence as my uncle's dad and the dog all chased after him. Finally, the man fell over the fence and escaped into the night. I ran back into the house, and the amount of blood on the porch was crazy. My mobster protectors came in about 15 minutes later and all laughed. They never called the cops. It was discovered the man had broken through a window in the basement and had rooted through some stuff down there. He was most likely a thief on his way upstairs to check out the rest of the house, thinking that he would blend in and not be noticed among the huge party. The only thing I know is that he will think twice about coming back to our house, and I'm certain that he will have some scars left from the German Shepherd who appeared to get a good bite or two of him.
When I was younger, we used to go to my Uncle Rob's house for Thanksgiving. He lived about 30 minutes away, and I'm not sure what year this was, but I was maybe 12 or 13. I remember that my brother, sister, and parents left our house on Thanksgiving morning to go to my uncle's. After leaving our house, we got onto the roads, and things were pretty quiet. For the first part of the drive, everything was fine. It was about halfway through when my dad mentioned the car behind us. He was like, "Why is this guy following me?" At that point, we all looked behind us at the same time. There was a smaller SUV, silver color, that was behind us on the road. To that point, we had made maybe 3 or 4 turns. Apparently, it had been following us almost since our house. I hadn't even noticed. None of us had an answer. I thought that maybe it was just a coincidence. The car behind us was not right up on our bumper or anything. We also couldn't really tell who was driving at all because they weren't close enough. We kept going towards my uncle's. My uncle lived in a quiet neighborhood where the houses were pretty far spread out. I thought that there was no way this car behind us would keep following us there. But as we kept going, the car remained back behind us. We made several more turns and soon got into the city where my Uncle Rob lived. The car was still there. At that point, we thought that maybe it was another one of our relatives also going to Rob's. We didn't know all of the other kinds of cars that our family drove, so it was possible. Still, we were all very suspicious. When we finally got to my uncle's street, we now were driving much slower. The car was still behind us, and it stayed back at about the same distance as before. When we got to my Uncle Rob's driveway, my dad was considering to keep driving and try to lose the guy, but we ended up just pulling into the driveway. The car behind us kept going down the street and did not pull in after us. This was a relief. After getting to my uncle's, we went inside of his house. He had a big house and a big yard as well. That's why most of our family gatherings were held there. When you were inside of his place, there was not really a good view of the street out front, but you could see it a little bit if you were looking. I remember that a few of us, including myself, were in his living room watching football on TV. I was sitting on the far side of the room, right by the window. Occasionally, I would look out. At one point, I saw the same car that had followed us, driving by the opposite way, very slowly. We all had just chalked it up to be a coincidence. Maybe somebody who lived by us was going to one of my uncle's neighbors, or lived there. I found it interesting, but still not a big deal. Then, maybe 5 minutes later, I saw the car again. It was driving from the direction that it had gone minutes before. This time, it was going extremely slow. Then it came to a stop, just past my uncle's driveway. The car was stopped for maybe 30 seconds, and then it slowly drove away. I found this to be really odd, and I was the only person who noticed it. I got up, went and found my dad, and then told him about it. He found it interesting, but the car had driven away again, so there was not much that we could do. I went back to my seat in the living room, and we kept watching football. I got distracted, talking to a lot of people and stuff. Soon, we had Thanksgiving dinner in the dining room. After that, some of us went back to the living room to watch more football. By now, the sun had set. I was sitting in the same chair that I was at before. At one point, I thought I saw something from outside. It was hard to see anything because there weren't really any lights out there. But when I looked over, I was sure that I saw a man. He had gone behind a tree. I kept watching. A few seconds went by, and then this man ran out from the tree and went behind a bush about 20 feet away. I stood up from my chair and asked my cousin next to me if he had seen that. He had no clue what I was talking about. I started to tell him what I had just seen, and in that moment, somebody tried to open the back door to the house, which was right between the living room that we were in and the end of the kitchen. Thankfully, the door was locked. One of my uncles sitting in the living room sat up and said, "Did somebody go outside?" Nobody had gone outside. We were just looking at each other, confused. Then, one of my uncles got up and walked over to the window next to the door. He looked out of it, and he said that he saw a guy running away. He opened up the door and started to go outside. I looked back out the window that I was near, and then saw the man running behind another tree farther away. By now, everybody was standing and looking out windows and talking to each other about what was happening. Then I saw the car again. It drove away rather quickly down the street. Several people, including myself, went outside, even though it was pretty cold. We searched around the property a little bit, but the guy was gone. For the rest of that night that we were there, the man didn't come back. I didn't see the car either. My family left some time later and weren't followed or anything home. To this day, I still wonder who that was, why he followed us, and why he was prowling around my uncle's yard.
Back when I was in college, I would go home each year for Thanksgiving. I remember that we were going to my grandparents' house along with a bunch of other family members. But beforehand, I went to visit one of my friends from high school on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. My mom texted me when I was on the way back, asking if I could pick up a few things at the supermarket. So I stopped at the one that was closest to our house. By now, it was about 6 p.m. or so. When I got there, it was extremely busy. I parked at the far back end of the parking lot because of this, and then I walked inside. I didn't have to get that much stuff, just a few items, but I didn't really know where they were. I remember walking around the store, and at one point, despite it being very crowded, I noticed this one woman staring at me. It was really strange to say the least. She was just standing sort of on the edge of the store near the frozen food, and just looking at me like a laser. I did not know why, because I certainly did not recognize her at all. I looked away and continued with the shopping. When I was at another part of the store completely, I saw the woman again. She was once more seeming to be doing nothing but staring in my direction. I found this very odd, but I did not want to go confront her or anything. I tried to just stick with my shopping list. The store was very crowded, so it took me a while to get everything, but I soon did. Then I went to the front of the store, waited in line, and then checked out. In this time period, I did not see the lady who had been staring at me. Then I left the store and walked out to my car in the parking lot. I put the groceries in the back and then got inside the driver's door. It was shortly after getting in and right after I started my engine when I heard a knock at the front passenger's window. I looked over to find the same woman who had been staring at me from the store. She was knocking on my window like she really wanted to tell me something, so I rolled it down, curious as to what she wanted. I was thinking that maybe I would get an explanation as to why she had been staring at me. However, the woman then held up a $20 bill and said that I had dropped it. I was very confused and pretty sure that I did not drop a 20 at all. I asked if she was sure, and she said yes, and she had seen me dropping it in the parking lot. I didn't even think that I had any 20s on me, and I never really carried much cash. By now, I was 99% sure that she was lying. I said no, I did not drop a 20, and by now the woman was holding the bill inside of my window to hand it to me. I did not take it though. I told the woman that it wasn't mine. Her head was basically inside of my car, and her hand was just a couple of feet away from me as she leaned in. After I told her that it wasn't mine, she did not back up though. Instead, the woman then started to crawl inside of my window and into my car. It was very strange. However, she was small and petite and was able to fit. In a quick decision, I just turned the keys back, shutting off the engine. Then I took the keys out of the ignition. I then left my car and started walking away. The woman got inside of my car, and I walked a distance back and took out my phone to call the police. As I stood there and watched my car, about a minute went by before I saw the woman get out and then run away. After that, I returned to my car, went inside and locked the doors and waited for the police. They came out, but the woman was gone by the time they got there. I told them what happened, and I really don't know what the woman was trying to do. She didn't steal anything from inside my car, although I didn't really have anything worth stealing. I think she was probably going to try to steal the car itself, or else make me drive her someplace or something. Really, I have no idea. After that, though, I went home, and I have not seen the woman since.
My name is Rachel, and this story happened just last year when we were hosting Thanksgiving at our house. I live in a 2-story house with my husband, and we were going to be having about 20 people over. We were mostly prepared for all of the guests, and had done some shopping for food and things earlier in the week. We had cleaned the house, and people were supposed to start arriving at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. At about 11 a.m., we realized that we did not have enough drinks. We were not sure what to do at first, with all the stores being closed for Thanksgiving, but there was a chain of gas stations that was open 24/7 and had a good variety of things. We realized that we should be able to quick go and get some there. I sent my husband out to go buy them, while I started to prepare some food. A few minutes after he left, I had a few minutes, and I went downstairs into the basement to get some extra folding chairs. We would need them for the number of guests that we were expecting for dinner. As I was downstairs, trying to see how many of these chairs I could pick up at once, I heard the front door to our house open and close. My husband definitely was not back so soon, and if this was him, I expected him to say something. I realized that some of our guests must have come early, but they weren't supposed to show up for almost 2 hours. With a chair in each hand, I started to walk up the staircase, but a few steps in, and I heard whoever had come inside the house was now walking upstairs to the 2nd floor. Plus, they hadn't said anything at all. Now, if this was one of our guests, they wouldn't just walk upstairs, and they would likely call out saying hi or something. I suddenly got a really bad feeling. I took out my phone and texted my husband asking him if he had just entered the house. He responded quickly, telling me that he had just arrived at the gas station. My bad feeling got worse. Somebody was inside of our house and had gone upstairs. My husband told me that he was on his way back, which made me feel slightly better, but I knew it would still be a few minutes. There was still a slim chance, though, that it was family or a neighbor. We were pretty friendly with our next-door neighbors, and they had come over a few times. They weren't the type to just barge in, though. I quietly went upstairs from the basement, and then opened up the door at the top of the stairs. I took a few steps into the hallway when I heard somebody starting to come down the stairs. They would soon be in my sight. I had a really bad feeling, and I didn't want whoever it was to see me. I quickly ran back down the basement stairs, and when I got downstairs, I went into the bathroom off my husband's man cave type of room. Then I locked myself inside of it. Minutes went by, and inside of the bathroom, I couldn't hear anything that was going on upstairs. My mind was racing, and I was starting to panic. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps coming down the basement stairs. I knew that my husband wasn't home yet. I went to the back of the bathroom, as far from the door as I could. The footsteps seemed to go right over to the bathroom, and then they tried opening the door. I had locked it, and after it didn't open, there was a light knock on the door. I didn't move, and whoever was on the other side didn't say anything. Several seconds went by. Then my phone vibrated. It was my husband letting me know that he was back. I told him that somebody was in the basement, and then I dialed 911. I didn't hear whoever was at the door walk away, so I knew that they were still right on the other side. When the 911 operator answered the phone, I told them that somebody was in our house. As I was on the line with them, I heard my husband's voice from the top of the stairs. He shouted, asking who was down here. I heard whoever was on the other side of the door run away in another direction. At that point, I just bolted for the door, opened it up, and sprinted for the stairs. It had to be the fastest that I ran in my life. I went all the way up the stairs and made it to my husband. I told him that I called the cops, and we both left our house and went outside to my husband's truck. We waited in the truck in the driveway for the police to get there. They arrived about 10 minutes later. After entering and searching our house, they were able to successfully locate a man. They left the house with him, and he was one of the creepiest guys I had ever seen. To that point, though, I had never seen him before and didn't recognize who he was. We were just happy that he was found. Apparently, he had been hiding behind our basement couch. I'm not sure why he was there, or if he thought nobody was home when he went inside, but that was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life.
Thanksgiving had always been a family affair at my grandparents' small farm. As a teenager, I found the gatherings increasingly boring each year. I was not interested in listening to adults talk about things which I found boring at the time. After an early Thanksgiving dinner, I felt restless and announced to my parents that I was going to wander the property. I just wanted some time to myself outside of the house. Eventually, I arrived at the old barn on the property. My grandparents didn't use it much anymore, and it was mainly used for storage. The barn door was old, but surprisingly easy to open. My grandparents never locked it since there wasn't anything valuable inside, I guess. Inside the barn, it was pitch black, so I had to use my phone's flashlight. The light illuminated tons of old tools and cobwebs that clung to the rafters. I was starting to enjoy myself as it was fun and spooky exploring the old barn. On a workbench lay a small hatchet. It was an old metal rusty one covered in dried blood. They don't have animals on the farm currently, but I recalled how my grandparents used to butcher animals on the farm. It didn't feel unusual to see such a tool here, even though the blood made me uneasy. I kept exploring the barn, and eventually made my way up the stairs to the loft. It was mostly just old hay up there, and I was about to turn back down the stairs when I stepped on something under the hay. As I moved some hay to the side with my foot, what I discovered almost made me tumble backwards down the stairs. I'd uncovered the empty eye sockets of a long dead corpse staring blankly at me. I sprinted back into the house, interrupting the conversation and telling everybody what I had found in the barn. After my dad and uncle came out with me to confirm it, my grandparents called the sheriff. The body had been there for about 3 years with multiple hatchet wounds, an investigation revealed. The realization hit me hard. I had picked up and touched the murder weapon earlier when I was checking out the old tools. My grandparents were in shock that they had lived on the farm for a few years without knowing that somebody was dead in their barn. They couldn't identify the body other than that it was a man, and the investigation dragged on, but no leads surfaced. To this day, nobody knows who killed him or why. Something really crazy happened to me one time the night before Thanksgiving many years ago. I was going to be doing a lot of cooking for Thanksgiving and had been planning it all out. I had to go to the grocery store several times in the days leading up to it. The day before Thanksgiving, though, I realized I had forgot one ingredient. Somehow I had forgotten it, but it was very important. I needed to get it, so that night I told my husband that I would be right back, and I left for the local grocery store. It's a pretty average-sized store, and it has anything you could need. When I got there, I went inside, and it was extremely busy. I wasn't surprised about that, but luckily I only needed one thing. I started making my way through the store, which was kind of challenging with all the people. Soon I was in an aisle where I thought I would find what I needed. I looked around for a couple of minutes, and I finally found it and picked it up. At that point, I was kind of in the back corner of the store. It wasn't the very back, but it was one of the last aisles. Before I could start walking to the front, though, a random guy approached me. He told me to stop and said that he needed to talk with me. The way that he was talking made it sound like either he worked there or he was trying to be all professional. He was just some random guy. I asked him what he was talking about, and he said that I needed to come with him. He said that he was a secret shopper and he worked for store security. Then he said that he saw me shoplifting, which I could not believe. I said that there had to be a mistake because I never did anything. At that point, I was very confused. I wasn't completely sure if he had me mixed up with someone else or if he was full of crap or what. But I knew that there was no way anybody could think that I had shoplifted. The only thing I touched the whole time was the item that I had in my hand that I was going to buy. I had never put it in my coat or anything. When I tried telling the guy that I didn't do anything, he said that I could tell my side of the story later on. He said in the meantime I had to come with him, and there was no arguing that. He said that we had to leave the store out of a back entrance. Then he started to walk further towards the back, encouraging me to follow, but I didn't. I said I wasn't going anywhere. It seemed too crazy. I told the guy that he could look at the cameras and that would prove that I was innocent. He said that I could argue it another time. In that moment, I saw another store employee starting to walk by. She was not looking at me and did not seem to know what was going on with the shoplifting situation. I walked up to her and asked her if they had store cameras. She stopped and looked confused for a moment before saying yes. I turned back to the guy to try to tell him to look at them again, except the man was now gone. I looked around and saw him walking away quickly. This was strange. Now all of a sudden he was just letting it go? The employee of the store wearing the store uniform asked me why I wanted to know if there was cameras. I told her because that guy said I was shoplifting and I wasn't. As I was telling her that, I was pointing at the guy, who just went out of sight and went around a corner, so we couldn't see him anymore. The woman asked me who, not seeing the man, and I told her that he was gone now, but he said he was store security or something. The woman said that she had no idea who I was talking about and wasn't aware of a security guy. I asked her if I could just check out and leave then, and she said yes. Then she walked away and I felt much better, so I started heading towards the front of the store to check out. When I had made it about halfway there, I felt someone grab my shoulder from behind. I turned around and looked, and it was the same guy. He said that I was not allowed to leave and I had to go with him. He said that if I tried to get away from him again, I could be arrested. I told him that the lady working there said I could go. I also told him that she had no idea who he was. The man claimed that was because he was a plainclothes secret shopper, and because he was a secret shopper, most of the employees didn't even know that he worked there. He said that was to prevent employee theft as well. His story sort of made sense, but I still wasn't buying it. This guy just reeked of BS. I asked him if I could see some credentials, and he said yes after we left the store. He kept trying to usher me to the back to leave, but really he was just seeming more and more sketchy to me. I continued to walk to the front of the store. The closer we got to the registers, the angrier the man got. He was borderline yelling at me. I told him to call the police. I didn't care. He didn't want to do that though, which seemed even more suspicious. He claimed that was because it would make everything worse and that I would get a felony, and he was trying to help me. However, when we got to the checkouts, there were more employees around. As soon as I got near them again, the man turned and walked away. I got in line and he was quickly out of my sight. I wasn't buying that the guy worked there in any capacity at all. He was totally unprofessional and saying stuff that didn't make any sense. When it was my turn to check out with the one item that I had, I reported the guy. Soon after, a manager came over and I reported the whole situation to him. I was told that the man did not work for the store and they would look for him. I was also told that I was not under any suspicion of shoplifting and I was free to leave. It was a big relief, and I left the store and then walked out to my car in the parking lot. When I got inside my car, before driving away, I saw the man come driving up really quickly. He stopped in his car sort of in front of me. I realized the same guy was driving. His car was just stopped sort of blocking mine for a few seconds. He wasn't looking at me, which was strange, but he seemed to know that he was blocking my way of leaving. I rolled down my window and yelled loudly that I was calling the police and that if he tried to follow me, I was going straight to the cops. He continued to sit there for about 10 more seconds, and then very quickly he drove off, screeching the tires. I left and went home and thankfully was not followed or anything. When I got back, my husband asked me why it took so long for me to get just one thing. I told him the crazy story. Looking back, I'm not sure why the guy kept messing with me. My only thought is that possibly he was going to try to kidnap me or something. That's maybe why he kept wanting to leave out the back. And it's also crazy how I saw him again in the parking lot. I'm glad that I never saw him again after that.
This happened when I was about 13 years old. I remember that year for Thanksgiving, we were going to be having it at our house. People were going to start coming over in the afternoon, and my parents were up late preparing food the night before, and my sister and I were helping clean the house. We had a 2-story house, and all of the bedrooms were upstairs. Downstairs was the main living room, the kitchen, dining room, and a few others. Our house was sort of big, and it was a good place to have a bunch of people over. I remember that before going to bed, my parents mentioned how they had to get up early to get more foods ready for the day. After we had all gone to bed, and the next morning came, I was woken up by my mom. She told me that both her and my dad were going to go to the store quick to buy a couple of last-minute ingredients that they hadn't realized they were out of. I was really groggy from my sleep and being interrupted. It must have been like 7 a.m. or so. I remember my mom saying she just wanted to let me know and they would be back soon, then she left. I instantly turned over and fell back asleep. Probably like 30 minutes later or so, my alarm went off and I woke up. I was a little bit more rested and awake now. I got out of bed and into the hallway to use the bathroom. When I did, I noticed that my sister's bedroom door was open and she didn't appear to be inside of it. I could sort of hear the TV playing downstairs and I figured that she was already up. I used the bathroom and then went downstairs. It was clean and the sunlight lit up most of the space. In the living room, the TV was playing and on the Thanksgiving Day parade. I looked around for my sister, but she was nowhere to be seen. I went into the kitchen, but she wasn't there either. I guess maybe she had gone with my parents to the store, and I returned to the living room towards the couch. Then I heard a noise. It sounded like a whisper. I got really startled, and then I heard it again. It was my sister's voice, and it sounded like she was behind the couch. I looked behind it and saw her. She was all crouched up into almost a ball and looked terrified. She just whispered to me that there was a man in the house and told me to hide. I quickly went behind a sort of lazy boy chair that was next to the couch in the living room. I whispered to my sister, asking where the man was. She said she didn't know, but when she came downstairs, she saw a guy in the kitchen. Just then, we both heard a noise. It was coming from the hallway near the front door. I looked out from behind the chair I was hiding behind, and I saw a guy walking into the living room. He was tall and wore a black sweatshirt. He also had on a hat, but I didn't get a good look at his face. I quickly but quietly tried to move back behind the chair so that the guy couldn't see me. I heard him walk around the living room, and the footsteps got closer. They came within maybe 15 feet of where my sister and I were hiding. I was terrified, and my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. It's a good thing the TV was playing, or I feel like the man would have definitely heard us. I heard him walk farther away and seemingly into the kitchen. The kitchen was farther away from the front door. I felt like maybe my sister and I could get away if the man was in there. I whispered to my sister and told her to follow me. We counted to 3 and then got out and ran as fast and also as quietly as we could to the front door. The area the man was in the kitchen was sort of blocked off from seeing us. We didn't look back to see if he heard us or saw us. When we made it to the front door, I unlocked it and opened it as fast as I could. Then we both rushed out the door and into the driveway. Right after we got outside, we saw our parents' car driving down the street and pulling in. It was great to see, and we both ran out to them. They barely had a chance to get in the driveway and seemed really confused to see us running out of the house. We got inside the back seats of the car and told them about seeing a guy inside the house. They ended up calling the police from the car as we sat in the driveway. We drove down the street a little ways because my sister didn't feel safe even being in the driveway. The police showed up pretty quickly. When they did, they entered the house and emerged roughly 10 minutes later with the man. It was a huge relief to see that he was caught. Apparently, they found him hiding upstairs in my bedroom closet. That part of it really freaked me out. I'm so glad that I got up when I did. I guess when my parents left, they forgot to lock the door that led from the garage to the house because the front door was locked when I went outside and the door to the garage wasn't. But how the guy got inside our garage in the first place, we never really found out.
For Thanksgiving last year, I went back to my parents' house. Thanksgiving has been at their house for many years. Lots of family comes over and it's a big thing. I live about 30 minutes away from my parents, and after work on Wednesday, I went over to their house. I was going to help them with the cooking and getting things ready for Thanksgiving the following day. The plan was that I was just going to sleep over on the couch of their living room. I would occasionally do that sometimes when I would stay at my parents' house really late, and I was too lazy to drive back. My parents' house is pretty nice, and the couch is very comfortable as well. So anyways, when I got there, I helped them finish cleaning the house. Then we got to baking desserts and other foods that would be for Thanksgiving. This went on into the night, and we were in the kitchen, which is at the back of the house. Things were kind of loud when we were in there because we were cooking and stuff. We were also talking and had the TV on, so there was all kinds of noise. But despite all this, several times we thought that we heard noises coming from outside. Right past the kitchen at the back of the house, there's a sliding glass door leading out to the patio. Back there is some tables and chairs, but also a few bushes and trees. We thought that we heard movement. The first time, it sounded like a chair was being moved. I remember looking over, but I saw nothing, and we just carried on. But you couldn't really see outside at all because the lights were on inside and it was dark outside. We were also too busy to really think about it much. However, sometime later, we heard a bush moving out there. We attribute it to the wind, but it just seemed like something more than that to me. Overall, it seemed kind of strange, but we never saw anything and we were busy, so we just wrote it off as whatever. There was one more time that it sounded like something hit the window just off the dining room in the back end of the living room. It wasn't that loud, but it was noticeable. When we looked, we did not see anything. It seemed as though maybe it was squirrels or something like that. We just didn't give it that much of a serious thought. For the last couple of hours working in the kitchen, there were no more noises from outside at all. At one point, I even went outside briefly to cool off because the kitchen was hot and I was warm from all the cooking. Soon after that, we were all done in the kitchen. I remember that a while later, we all went to bed. My parents went upstairs and I went to the living room couch to sleep. All the lights in the house were now off and it was completely quiet. I laid on the couch and tried to fall asleep. Just as I was drifting off, I heard a noise. It was coming from the sliding door leading to the patio. The door was opening very slowly. From where I was on the couch, it was kind of far away, and it was just barely out of my view. I looked in the direction, and then the door continued to open. That's when I got up from the couch. Now I had a better view. As the door opened more, I saw a man start to enter our house. As soon as I saw him, I turned and started to run away. I was going to go upstairs and lock myself in a room and call the cops and alert my parents or whatever. However, right as I started to run away, I saw the man turn back in reverse. He started going back outside and quickly left. I was halfway to the stairs when I realized that he was gone. So I stopped, turned around, and then went back over to the door. I ran over to it, closed it, and locked it. Then I called the cops and woke up my parents. It was a whole thing, and the police looked around, but the man was gone. We realized that he must have been what we were hearing throughout the night. We really thought that it was just some squirrels or something. It was also my fault because I forgot to lock the back door when I went outside earlier. But thankfully the man was gone and he hadn't done anything. He was never found. I'm glad that I was not asleep yet when he entered the house, or who knows what could have happened.
My first semester of college as a freshman, I ended up spending Thanksgiving alone in my college dorm room. I was an international student and couldn't afford to go home for such a short break. In my first semester, I hadn't made any notable friends yet, at least the kind that would invite me to their family's Thanksgiving, so I was alone for the weekend. The campus was empty as most people had gone home, and the silence in my room felt heavier as the holiday approached. Thanksgiving night, I was really bored. I considered ordering takeout, but I had been alone in my room all day, so I wanted to get out for a bit. There was a small Chinese restaurant a few blocks from campus that I had been meaning to try, and it was one of the few places open for the holiday. I took a short walk through the cold and snow. The food was good, and I'm glad I decided to eat there since I could take some extra time to hang out in my booth and just be out of my dorm room. While I was at the restaurant, I was on my phone for a good chunk after I had finished eating, and I didn't notice much going on around me. However, after leaving and starting my walk back to my dorm, I found out someone seemed to be following me. I don't know if they were in the restaurant with me or just from the street outside, but I was scared and walked as fast as I could without actually running to get back to my dorm. When I got there, I sprinted up the stairs to my dorm room, fumbled with my key card, and was able to slam the door shut before the guy could get into the building. The man stood in the foyer of the building, pretending like he was only there to get warm. I had made it back though, and I felt safe, especially after going to my room and locking the door. Hours passed as I studied and watched stuff on my laptop, but around midnight, I heard my doorknob jiggle in an attempt to open, and then there was a knock at my door. I checked through the peephole and saw the same man who had been following me from before. He must have found a way into the building, but there was no way to know which door was mine. I even took all my name tags off my door. I just pretended like I wasn't inside, and eventually he went away. As soon as I left, I called campus security, alerting them that I thought the guy wasn't supposed to be in there. A bit later, I heard a commotion down the hall from my room, and I had to step out and see what was going on. 2 campus security officers had wrestled the same guy from before down to the ground outside of a student's door. There was also a student who appeared to be okay for the most part, with some blood coming from somewhere on their face. After they detained the man, I ended up getting the full story from one of the officers who had now arrived. Apparently, the man had been going around trying all the doors to see if any were open and knocking to see if somebody would open up. He ended up finding another student's door open and proceeded to enter and began physically assaulting the kid, but campus security was able to detain him before it got too out of hand. I'm just glad that I had decided to notify campus security about the man, and that I locked my door also. Definitely not how I expected my Thanksgiving night alone in the dorms to go.
This is the craziest thing that's ever happened in my family on Thanksgiving, and it was just a couple of years ago in 2023. My family has a very strong tradition for Thanksgiving that's been going on for many years. We live in Detroit, and if you're a football fan, you probably know that the Detroit Lions play football every Thanksgiving Day. The game starts at 12:30 p.m., and it's always a home game in Detroit. This has been going on for many, many years. Starting with my grandfather, he used to have season tickets to the Lions, and then my uncle did as well. My dad would go to a lot of games also, and starting in the 1990s, we would always go to the Thanksgiving game. It became a group of us, up to 20 people, most of them family members, and sometimes we would bring friends as well. We usually sit in the same area and we carpool to the game. Most of our family lives just outside of Detroit, and we're only like 15 minutes from the stadium. So the tradition is to go to the game, and then afterwards we all go to my uncle's place and have turkey and watch the Cowboys game. A couple of years ago we went to the game as normal. We went there in 4 different cars, all packed full. I don't remember all the people that went, but there was a lot of us. Not everyone in the family goes, but I know that I was there with my wife, and my brother, dad, and uncles were there as well. So fast forward through the game, we lost again for like the 10th year in a row, but it was still a great time. Anyways, when the game was over, everybody was leaving the stadium. Ford Field, where the Lions play, is in downtown Detroit, but kind of on the edge of it, so there's a lot of places to park, but sometimes it's a bit of a walk. After the game, there's just a massive crowd of people pretty much all leaving at once. They'll walk through the city to wherever they parked, and it's easy to get lost from the group in this time, and every year we seem to. But we always find our way back to the cars and then leave. That year in particular, I did not have driving duties, so I was more relaxed. My wife and I walked back to where our car was without a problem, which my brother was driving. We were the first to get there, and soon enough, everybody else did. The car was a large SUV with 3 rows of seats, so there were 7 of us total in there. Some people I guess changed who they were going with, because it was a different group than we went to the game with, and everybody else had parked in different spots. The reason for that is because it's very hard to find parking close to the stadium on game days, and everybody has their own preferences of lots. Anyways, everyone soon called and confirmed that we had all the people. Well, I remember that there was this one guy sitting in the back of our car who I didn't recognize. I literally had no idea who he was. He was sitting next to my cousin Elise and her boyfriend James. For some reason, I assumed that he must be the friend of them, because James was sitting next to him and I was sure that they were talking. Then the guy put up the hood of his coat and I remember put in headphones and sort of looked like he was going to go to sleep or something. I didn't bother to ask who the guy was. Then we just left. No one questioned the man at all. We went back to where the Thanksgiving gathering was at my uncle's. Most of my family lives near the Indian Village area in Detroit, which is not that far away. So we all arrived back and some people were already inside at my uncle's house. His place is pretty nice, and the house is large with 2 floors and a basement. We all left the car, including the guy that I had never seen before. Then we all went inside. When we did, I remember watching the guy, and he went right over to the stairs and walked up them. Nobody else seemed to really notice, because he was kind of slick with it. It just struck me as really odd though. He didn't talk to anyone, and just made a beeline for upstairs. Nobody seemed to be questioning who he was, but to be fair, there was a ton of people there. It's not uncommon that a family friend joins us to the game who's not always there, or joins us for Thanksgiving. Still, something seemed off to me. I mentioned it to my wife, and she said that she was also wondering who the heck that guy was. I said I assumed he was James's friend, and she said that's what she thought too, because he seemed to be talking to James. So we went over to him and asked him who his friend was. James said, quote, "I have no idea. I was wondering who he was and why he was sitting in the car with us." When he said that, I was shocked. Now, James was pretty new to the family with dating Elise, and it was only his 3rd Thanksgiving with us, so it's easy to see how he assumed the guy must have known us. I started going around and asking people, does anyone know who that guy was that went upstairs? Nobody knew who on earth I was talking about. I was describing him, and everybody thought that I was making it up as a joke. For a moment, I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone, but eventually a few of us decided to go upstairs and confront the guy. He hadn't come back down yet, and it had been a good 5 to 10 minutes. And there was no reason to go upstairs anyways. There was nobody else up there, as there were only bedrooms up there, and the whole Thanksgiving gathering was on the main floor. So me and my brother decided to go upstairs. We walked up there, and when we did, at first we heard nothing and we didn't see the guy. There was a long hallway and we started to walk down it. Soon we heard footsteps. We called out asking who the guy was and why he was up there. There was no response. We heard some noises coming from one of the bedrooms. So we got to the door and then we opened it. When we did, we saw the guy. We asked him who he was immediately and what he was doing. He did not answer. He was standing at the opposite end of the room and by the window. The next thing I knew, he quickly opened the window and literally jumped out of it to make his escape. It wasn't that high up, but still kind of far to jump it. We ran over and the guy had landed all right and he was now running through my uncle's backyard. He quickly left and took off into someone else's backyard. Very quickly, he was out of sight. We went back downstairs and reported what happened, and some people said they had seen him running away. My uncle went upstairs and soon after came back down and said the man appeared to have stolen a few things. So we called the cops and reported it. It was really crazy. That made for one of the most interesting Thanksgivings to date for us. I don't know why the man decided to go back with us. Was he at the game, or was he just walking around on the street and saw an opportunity? The whole thing is really crazy, but I'm glad that he didn't get hurt jumping out of the window and that he didn't hurt anybody else. I feel bad for my uncle though, who had some things stolen. This happened back when I was a kid, and the year was 2003. I remember that I was 12 years old and it was Thanksgiving Day. The tradition back then is that my family would go to my aunt and uncle's house. They lived about 30 minutes away from us, and other members of the family would be there too, like my grandparents, more aunts and uncles, and cousins. It was usually about 20 or 30 people there, and the house we would go to was pretty large. It was a little bit out there, so there was more land. The property that the house was on had a very large backyard, and there was a big open space with flat grass. Then surrounding it on almost all sides was a large woods. I'm not sure how far back of the land my family owned in the woods, but it was pretty far. On Thanksgiving every year we would have a football game in the backyard. Usually about 10 or 15 people would play in it, and most of the rest of the people would watch. A few would stay inside, but it was overall a pretty big deal. I was just old enough that I had recently started to be able to play in the big game. I was really into sports as a kid, and so I loved to go outside. I was really excited about the football game that year. We got there that year and everybody hung out inside for a while. After about an hour or two, I decided to go outside early for the game because I was anticipating it starting soon. I left the house out the front door and was going to walk around to the back. However, as soon as I got outside, I saw this guy in the driveway. He was standing next to one of the cars, and there were a bunch of cars parked there. The driveway was next to the house, and it was pretty wide. There was also a thick amount of trees between the driveway and the next door neighbor's property. When the man saw me, he turned around and started walking away. I didn't know whose car was whose other than a couple of people's, but it seemed to me like the man was trying to get into a car. I assumed at first that the car that he was at was his, but I also had no clue who this man was. It seemed sort of suspicious how he walked away as soon as he saw me though, and the man did not walk to the end of the driveway, and he didn't go inside either, but he walked into the trees instead. That also seemed pretty strange, and neither me nor him said anything to each other. He was quickly gone, and I figured that he was probably a neighbor or a friend or somebody else who I just didn't know. I was sure there was a logical explanation, and I just didn't give it that much thought, so I ran around into the backyard and started tossing the football around. Soon after, everybody else got outside. We started the football game sometime later, and it went on for about an hour. At one point during the game, I was on the sideline looking around. For some reason, I looked over to the woods. I noticed just past the tree line that same man. He was sort of hiding behind a tree and watching the football game. I'm surprised that I saw him because it was kind of hard to tell that he was there. And now this seemed really odd. He was definitely on my family's property and it was kind of creepy. I was wondering what he was doing there. I looked away though, and when I looked back, he was gone. Nobody else seemed to notice him, and for some reason I didn't tell anyone. I just went back to the game. After the football game was over, I pretty much forgot about the guy. We went back inside and soon after had Thanksgiving dinner. Sometime later on in the evening when everyone was hanging out, I was in the living room. A few of us were watching football on TV, and my uncle who lived at the house was talking to another one of my uncles. I overheard him saying that he thought someone had attempted to break into his car as well as their house the previous week. He was saying that he saw marks around the door of his car that he knows hadn't been there, and he said that his dog was barking like crazy that night, and when he let the dog out, he thought he heard somebody running away. He also heard some noises at the back door once, and when he went out to look, nobody was there. When I heard this, I remembered the suspicious man that I had seen. I told my uncle about it. This prompted us to get up and go outside. A group of about 5 of us walked around the property looking around. By that point, it was nearly dark out. However, when we were looking around, we didn't find the guy. We went back in, and the rest of the night, nothing strange happened. I'm not sure if he came back or not, but he wasn't able to break into anybody's cars. I'm guessing that he thought some people would forget to lock their doors at a Thanksgiving gathering. I never found out more about it. I'm not sure if he ever came back to my uncle's property or not. The years following that, the guy was never a problem. But that one year was pretty strange, especially when he was in the woods. I'm not sure why he was watching us or where he came from, but it was really creepy. I am a 25-year-old guy. A few Thanksgivings back, when I was still in college, my family was hosting Thanksgiving at our house like we always did. Typically, about 15 to 20 family members would all come over to our house. Before dinner, we hung out, had football on the TV, and had some snacks out. My older sister had just recently got engaged to her now husband Mark, and I've always been a bit of an amateur photographer, so the three of us went outside to take some photos. It was a perfect day and time for photographs because it had just begun to lightly snow and the sun was sort of peeking out of the clouds. It looked pretty cool. We went out to our backyard, which was fairly large. There was several acres of land back there with a shed and a pretty big woods. We went to the entrance of the woods, which was kind of our family photo spot, and I began taking pictures of them. We went to several other places in the yard and were outside for about 20 minutes and then came back inside. We looked over the photos briefly, and then it was time for dinner, where we had turkey and potatoes and all that good stuff. A little later that night, when we were all relaxing and watching some football, we decided to go over the photos again with a couple of my aunts to see. I have to admit that most of the photos were really good, but when we got to the ones in front of the woods, we noticed something. In 3 photos, in the window of the shed in the background, we could see what appeared to be a man's face looking at the camera. We had completely missed this the first couple times we had looked. It was a pretty creepy sight to see, and my sister couldn't believe it. We weren't able to make out much details of the man because of how far away he was, but we could only see his head in the window. We showed the pictures to my dad, who decided to go out to the shed with 2 of my uncles. They were all pretty large men, and said they were confident they could take whoever it was, but we still didn't know who the man was or if he was dangerous or not. We also didn't know if he would still be in the shed. Many of us watched from the window as my dad and 2 uncles walked out of our house towards the shed. When they got there, they opened the door, and I saw all 3 of them go inside. Then we saw briefly a man run out and try to hit one of my uncles, but was soon overpowered and shoved back into the shed. My dad and uncles then shut the door and all stood in front of it to block it. They signaled to us that the man was still in fact inside and yelled for us to call the police while they held the door shut so the man couldn't escape. My aunt had already called the police, and about 5 minutes later, they showed up and arrested the man. He was a dirty-looking guy who for some reason had wandered into our yard and decided to live in our shed for a whole 2 days. It made for a very memorable Thanksgiving.
This happened to a friend and I on Thanksgiving night 5 years ago. I was a junior in high school, and I was spending Thanksgiving night at my friend Alex's house. We had been friends since middle school and took many walks around town at night. And that's what we did late Thanksgiving night this year after dinner and watching the NFL game. Our town was a pretty good size of about 15,000 people, and it had a low crime rate. Nothing major ever really happened in our town, so we felt safe, even at 11:30 p.m. That night, we strolled through Alex's neighborhood, which was familiar territory for us. We walked down the main street, which was our usual route. As we continued on the main street in town, a car passed us. I didn't pay much attention to it until it turned around at the end of the street. I'm glad one of us had looked behind shortly after, because we noticed that the car had stopped on the side of the road. I exchanged a glance with Alex, both of us instinctively tensing up, because nobody got out of the car, and the car just sat there with its engine running. We kept walking, a little more nervous now about why the car just randomly stopped there. It wasn't in front of a house or anything. After a bit, the car suddenly started moving again, but this time it was speeding in reverse towards us. We both started to panic and jumped into the woods to our left, which wasn't that big of a forest, but it was pretty thick in there. We had run only about 15 feet into the thick woods by the time the car had gotten to our location, so we stopped moving and looked back through the branches and leaves to watch and stay quiet. The passenger side door of the car swung open and a man stepped out. I didn't get a good look at him because once again it was really thick woods and there were tons of branches and leaves in the way. In the dim light though, I could see that he hesitated and scanned the woods from the sidewalk, perhaps searching for us. For a moment, he seemed to consider chasing us, but then he turned and got back into the car. The car eventually backed out of the area and drove away. We waited in the woods just a little longer, but since there weren't many cars out on the road, we were nervous about seeing that one again. We snuck back towards Alex's house, trying to stay off the main road as much as we possibly could by cutting through some people's backyards. I have no idea if the intention of the people in that car was a prank, a mugging, or a kidnapping, but I'm glad that we were cautious anyways, and we ran into the woods as soon as we saw the car coming towards us in reverse. After that night, we still continued our walks, but we both carried small knives on us after that just in case.
This happened 3 years ago in 2022. It was Thanksgiving week, and my daughter's boyfriend had invited us over to his family's house to spend Thanksgiving there. There wasn't much space in the house, so my daughters and I had to stay in the basement. The only people who lived in the house besides my daughter's boyfriend were his grandmother, his sister, and her husband. A few more family members were supposed to be staying over as well, but since we came late that night, I didn't get to meet any of them. We stayed the first night in the house, and it was finally Thanksgiving morning. I normally wake up pretty early, so I was up at 7 a.m. I was the only one awake in the house. I went upstairs to the kitchen and sat on a chair in the kitchen. I sat for a bit just drinking some coffee and relaxing before the day began. As I was drinking my coffee, I saw a cute little boy coming downstairs. He was in his pajamas and came down to the fridge to get something to drink. I smiled at him and watched him go back upstairs. I remember thinking about how adorable he was. Well, later that day, everyone got ready and went into the kitchen and living room as we began our Thanksgiving celebration. Everybody was together and having a great time, and that's when I decided to ask out loud, "Hey, where's the cute little boy that I saw earlier this morning?" I was instantly pulled aside by the grandma of the family. She looked at me in shock and said, "Shh, careful, my daughter doesn't hear you." The grandma explained to me how her daughter's son, her grandson, died in front of the house a few years ago. He got hit by a car. Grandma told me that she sees him sometimes too, but nobody believes her. My heart instantly dropped as I couldn't believe what I had just heard. After hearing that, I couldn't help but have a weird feeling for the rest of the time that I was in that house. Later that night, my daughter and her boyfriend went upstairs to get some yogurt from the fridge. She specifically remembered grabbing a strawberry yogurt and putting back a banana yogurt she had grabbed. As they headed back down to the basement, their hearts dropped as they noticed that the banana yogurt was placed on their bed. We felt super uneasy about this. Thankfully, we ended up going home the next day, but I'll never forget how crazy those 2 days were.
Last Thanksgiving, my family decided to spend the holiday at our cabin for a change. The drive was longer than usual because of the snowfall, but we didn't mind because the radar had predicted light snowfall for the next day or two. We arrived at the cabin just as night fell. My parents prepared dinner while my siblings and I helped to get the place ready. We lit candles and pulled out the board games to play for the night because we didn't have any TVs there. As we sat down for dinner, the wind began to howl outside. It quickly turned into a snowstorm that we had not been expecting. By the time we finished eating, snow was piling up against the windows. Over the course of the next day, the storm stayed persistent and might have even gotten worse, so we weren't able to drive home the next morning and had to stay another night at the cabin. The second night, the power ended up going out as well. Later that night, after everybody had gone to bed, I began to hear noises. It was no longer just the storm, however. I began hearing other sounds mixed in, such as thuds and scraping noises. I laid in my sleeping bag and tried to fall back asleep, hoping that it was nothing unusual. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back of the cabin. I glanced over at my parents, who were both still asleep, so I decided to get up and check. As I crept to the back door, I noticed that the snow had drifted against the windows. I looked out, and for a moment, I saw nothing but white. I kept looking, though, and saw some movement through the snow. Approaching the door, I saw a figure who was carrying a log or a big piece of something else. I ran upstairs to wake my parents, and as I got to their room, an even louder banging and pounding on the door began. The louder bangs had already woken them up, thankfully. My dad grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar, while my mom called the police. We huddled together out of sight from the door, waiting for the police to arrive. The loud banging and scraping continued, as whoever was out there attempted to break into our cabin. The door by the lock area actually started to splinter a little as the person kept banging on it with their piece of wood. The police pulled into our driveway just in time, though, and the man bolted into the woods. The officers didn't even bother trying to chase after the guy in the woods because of the snowstorm. The storm finally let up early the next morning so that we could get out of there and go home. Looking at both sides of the lock and the door in the daylight the next morning, it was a miracle it even held up. It was a good thing the police were able to make good progress through the snowstorm, because I'm not sure how much longer the door would have lasted. Also, we discovered that our power had been purposely cut, something which we had just thought happened as a result of the storm. My family had no idea who the intruder could have been, and we ended up selling the cabin soon after the incident just in case.
I was a young teenager, maybe 13 or 14 years old at the time. It was Thanksgiving night, and normally it was just my parents and I having the traditional turkey dinner at home. However, my parents had invited friends over this year, and these friends brought their 2 dogs over to play with our family dog. The adults had decided to go out after dinner. I don't remember if it was a party or just a bar or something. Either way, since they weren't coming back until late at night, I was tasked with watching and caring for the dogs. I, of course, used this opportunity to watch TV downstairs in the living room. Since it was Thanksgiving and Christmas was right around the corner, our house was decorated. Most notable, there were these fragile plastic or glass fake candles on each window plugged in to light up. So I was laying on the couch watching TV with all 3 dogs snuggled up around me. A few times every hour they'd all leap off the couch and start barking endlessly at the front door right beside the living room. The first time I had gone over to the window next to the front door to see if my parents and their friends were pulling into the driveway early. The next few times I checked again, thinking maybe it was a neighbor out there or a wild animal in the yard, but I never saw anything. Each time I ushered the dogs back to the couch, relaxed, and it was fine. But it kept happening over and over again. I don't remember exactly how many times the dogs did this, but the last time I had gotten up to calm them down again, I noticed they were angled slightly more to the window with a candle than the door this time. I was intending to peek out the window to see if something was there, but as I did so, the candle was suddenly torn out from the socket in the wall and broke against the wall behind me. The dogs erupted in more panic. I had no idea what to do, and I ran upstairs with them following. I didn't know exactly what my plan was. If this happened now, I'd most likely go outside to a neighbor. But regardless, I locked myself and the dogs in my bedroom upstairs until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, my parents returned, and I got in trouble for breaking their decorative candle. They'd never believe me if I told them what happened, and I'm honestly still confused. I really don't know what happened there. This story occurred many years ago. It was probably the early 2000s at the time, and I was about 5 or 6 years old. The Thanksgiving tradition from my family is to go to my Uncle Rob and Aunt Carrie's house. They have a pretty nice place about 30 minutes away, and it's a middle point for lots of our family to meet. I remember that year we had a big family 2-hand touch football game outside. It was really fun, but I was too young and too little to participate, so I stood around and watched with the rest of the family. As I was watching the game, my Uncle Rob's neighbor, John, came up to me and started talking with me. John would also be at our family get-togethers sometimes, because he would often just stop by and say hi, and then end up staying for a while. I didn't know much about him, but he always just seemed a little bit strange to me. He was probably in his 50s, and had grayish hair and wore large glasses. He asked me several questions about football and who my favorite players were and stuff, and then talked with me about some other things. I remember then he asked me if I wanted to see his house. I didn't really want to, but he was really persuasive and kept telling me that I had to see it. So finally, I said okay, and then we got up and we walked back to the front of the house and then down the driveway. We walked down the street into his house, which was maybe a 10-minute walk away. When we got there, I saw his house, which was an older, more beat-up looking house. He let me in the front door, and the first thing I smelled was a strong, musty smell. The house was pretty messy, and I didn't really know what we were doing there. He told me to sit on the couch, so I did, and he turned on the TV. I remember watching football on TV for a little while he sat across from me in his chair. We did that for maybe 10 or 15 minutes until the front door suddenly opened. It was my Uncle Rob. He looked really surprised to see me and asked us what we were doing. John then stood up and told my Uncle Rob that I had been begging him to take me to his house. He said that I had to go back, and then I went back to Rob's. John stayed there. I really don't know why John invited me over to his house that day, but after that Thanksgiving, I never saw or heard anything about him again.
This happened a few years ago. I went with my family to my aunt and uncle's house for Thanksgiving. They have a pretty large house, and it's good for having lots of people over. Most of the family gatherings take place there. So on Thanksgiving, I remember that we had been there for a while, and I was watching football in the living room with several other people. They have a pretty large TV there, and it's great to watch games on. Some other people were just off at the dining room, which is the next room over, sitting at the tables and talking. Then I remember that I overheard some people in the dining room talking about a man in the yard. I listened closer and found out that some random guy was apparently standing in the yard. My aunt and uncle's property is pretty large, and the neighborhood is not gated or anything, but it has a more private feel to it. The properties and houses are larger, and you don't really see people prowling around or anything much, so this was really strange. I got up and went over to the window to look. I was only able to just barely see the guy walking closer to the house and then went out of sight. He went towards the sliding glass door that led to the basement, but luckily that door was locked and the man was not able to get inside. By that point, almost everybody at the Thanksgiving gathering was talking about the guy. After trying to enter the basement, the man moved away, and this time I saw him walk back through the yard and eventually disappear behind a tree. He was going back towards the road, and we hoped that he was leaving the property. Nobody had any idea as to who he was or what he was doing there. It was getting dark out by this time, and it was probably about 5 p.m. or so. I remember that things went back to normal for a while, but maybe 30 minutes to an hour later, there was suddenly a knock at the front door. I remember soon after hearing that the same guy was there. My uncle opened up the door to him and asked what he wanted. I didn't really hear the conversation, but my uncle soon came back over and said that the guy claimed to be at the wrong address. Apparently, the man said that he was going to a friend's for Thanksgiving and thought that it was my uncle's house. For some reason, we didn't really believe it. The guy seemed very sketchy overall, especially how he had tried entering the basement door. Why not go to the front door in the first place? I figured that was that. However, later on in the night, I was back in the living room watching football again. Once more, I heard somebody ask if the man was back. This time, I got up right away and walked into the dining room. I saw my mom and one of my aunts sitting at the table near the window that looked out into the backyard. It was tough to see because it was dark out now, but at the back end of the yard there was a large woods, and we saw a man standing on the edge of the woods. He appeared to just kind of be looking at the house, and that woods was not really that close to any neighbor's property at all, so it was really strange that the guy would be there. He just kept standing there, partly behind a tree, and looking in our direction. After literally like 5 minutes, he finally moved away. Then we saw him sprinting through the yard and then went out of sight. It was really strange. For the rest of the time that I was there that night, nobody saw the guy. I never really heard anything more about him. I'm not really sure what the guy was doing.
I was organizing some stuff in a storage unit until late on Thanksgiving night after dinner one year because I was moving places later that weekend. I share a storage unit with my mom and dad in a kind of sketchy area in town, but a part that I knew nonetheless. All my stuff was in the back of the unit, so I had to do a lot of lifting and moving. It was dark out and I was the only one left in the storage lot. Our unit is on the outside lot. As I was taking stuff out and getting it ready to move for the next few days, I saw a man come out of the inner storage lot inside the building. I kind of got a sketchy vibe from the dude, but he seemed homeless. So I said happy holidays and he asked to help me, but I insisted I was fine on my own. He then left and I continued moving stuff back into storage. The guy then showed up again and approached me closer this time and said, "You sure you don't need any help?" And I said, "I'm good, but thank you." Then he said, "Look, I need help moving my stuff into my storage, so can you open the door for me in the inner lot?" At that moment, I knew something wasn't right. I declined, saying I needed to get home and it was important, to which he responded, "I think what I need to do is more important." My anxiety started kicking in hardcore. I finished packing my stuff and clutched my keys to the car to get out. I locked my storage unit up, all while having a conversation with the man. I tried to keep my cool because I had no idea if he had a gun or a knife on him. I said I would help him, but had a plan to start running, had my phone ready, and made sure that he stayed ahead of me. I then told a fib that my mother was sick today and it was a hard day. After hearing this, the guy started to be more friendly and nice. He then stopped before we got to the door and went, "Actually, I don't need your help." At that moment, I knew that I used my wit to its advantage. He felt empathy and I started walking away. He then asked for a ride and I said that I couldn't do that. I started walking faster and he followed me and said please, and then asked why I looked so stressed and worried. I then got in my car and he started knocking on my window. I drove myself to the gate and I had to enter a code to get out of there. I had a feeling that he was going to mug me, rob me, or possibly worse. Thankfully, I was able to get out of there and drive away from him. The only thing I know is that I'm investing in some self-defense weapons, as that was the most terrifying thing in my life. This happened back in like 2014, I believe. It was Thanksgiving Day and I was at my aunt and uncle's house. I was in high school at the time, and basically my whole family was together as we are every year. Everybody was hanging out and having a good time. After dinner, when it got a little bit later, some people were going to go shopping. This was back when Black Friday was a huge deal, and a lot of the stores were actually opening at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving night, which seemed crazy. There were a lot of big sales though. So one of my aunts started the tradition of going shopping at 6 and then coming back at like 8. She said if anybody wanted to go with and join her, they could, and there would usually be like 5 people that would go. The rest of us would stay back at the house. Now, I wasn't going to go that year. It was mostly the women, like my aunts and a couple of cousins. The guys were too busy watching football, which is what I would want to do rather than shop on Thanksgiving night. So I recall that at about 5:30 it was dark out because it's late November and it was also pretty cold, probably like 35 or 40 degrees. My aunts and cousins left to go Black Friday shopping and the rest of us stayed. However, they came back inside less than a minute after leaving. They said there was some sketchy looking guy standing at the end of the driveway creeping them out, and he wasn't moving. This caught most of our attention. From where we were in the house, you could not look out of a window and really see that spot. My aunt's and uncle's yard was pretty big, and it had lots of trees on it. Plus, their driveway was actually really long, and it curved slightly as well. It seemed like an odd thing. This neighborhood was not one where people would walk down the street. There was no sidewalk, and it was also a cul-de-sac, so not that much traffic at all. A few of us got up to go and see, including myself. I remember walking to the front door and going outside. Then I walked out and started going down the driveway with a couple other people. Soon we were able to see the end of the driveway, and there was in fact a man standing there. I thought that he would have been gone by then. He looked fairly young and was average height, but pretty skinny. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt with the hood covering most of his head. He also appeared to be barefoot, which was strange because it was really cold outside. But perhaps the most weird part was that he was just standing there facing away from us and looking down. And he was right smack in the middle of the driveway, blocking anybody from leaving. Somebody called out to him, asking what he was doing. There was no response. I think that everybody was a little creeped out, maybe a lot creeped out. People didn't seem to recognize him as living in the area. Someone else asked him to move, which he did not. Then somebody asked him in a nicer tone if he was okay. He still didn't answer. One of my aunts asked if he was cold and wanted to come inside, but somebody else quickly whispered to her to be quiet and not to offer that. Still though, the man did not respond. He barely moved at all, but was not completely still. Then, after like 5 minutes of this, one of my uncles started walking over to him. As he approached, at first there was still nothing. He asked the guy again what was going on. When my uncle got within like 20 feet of the guy, he suddenly turned and started running. The man went towards my uncle at first, who stopped, but then the guy turned and went off the driveway and behind some pine trees. He was pretty quickly out of sight. This was good and bad. He was not blocking the driveway anymore, so my aunt could go shopping now, but he was also somewhere on the property hiding now. He certainly seemed sketchy, and who knows what he was capable of. So most of the people went back inside, and me and like 3 other people stayed out. We started looking for the guy and calling out to him. I remember that we sort of went into the woods near the trees where he entered. At first, we saw nothing. We didn't go that far in though. As we were leaving that area, suddenly we heard the guy within the woods. This made us leave faster, as it sounded like he was approaching. We got back into the driveway, and I was almost at the house with my uncle about 30 feet behind me. I looked back and saw the guy come out of the woods and start charging at my uncle. My uncle took off running, and we all went inside and locked the door. The man did not try entering the house, and we called the cops. My uncle said that the guy looked like he was insane, and he said he wanted no part of fighting him, claiming that the guy probably had crackhead strength. We called the cops, saying that there was a guy who probably needed a wellness check and was trespassing. They came out and pretty quickly found the guy not far in the woods off the driveway. He turned out to be on drugs, which explained a lot. Looking back, I don't even know where he came from. That area was kind of far out in the country, so I have no clue. But thankfully, nothing like that has happened since.